Greetings, YouTube. This is Remarkable Republican bringing you the truth with truth-flavored bias. Today, we're going to talk about how to colonize Mars. For the sake of my listeners, I'd like to make this as clear and simple as humanly possible, so I'm going to divide the slideshow into a logical number of subdivisions. Firstly, let's talk about the need to colonize Mars. First, as you all know, we need a backup planet. What if something were to happen to the Earth? I think that's very obvious. It need not be elaborated further. Second, because Mars already has water, it probably already has life and therefore is capable of sustaining it. So there's no reason why we shouldn't want to be part of the life that Mars sustains. Third, the Earth is overpopulated, mostly due to the lack of self-control exercised by people in places like India, China, and Africa. Our Earth is overpopulated and there simply are not enough resources to go around to feed and clothe and house all these people. But partly because of this overpopulation, we have an increasing number of wars in the world. So if we have an outlet for people to escape to and to focus their energies on, we could avoid more war. So going to Mars in many ways is simply to benefit the Earth on a social level. The other reason is that it's becoming increasingly clear in a world where people like Vladimir Putin and Barack Obama can get elected that the political and religious liberty of liberty-loving citizens is under attack, and that there needs to be a place people can go where they can be truly free. One of the supposed wise complaints about colonizing Mars is that it would be unsafe and that we don't have the technology to do it. That is simply untrue. That is fear-mongering on behalf of NASA and other government scientists who are primarily focused on retaining power for themselves. In truth, colonization would not be terribly difficult given our current technology. You could, in theory, go outside just wearing a pressurized diving suit and a heavy winter coat and stay out there for 2 or 3 hours at a time to, say, take a walk or inspect the facilities. You would only need to break out the heavy spacesuit when you're out there for long periods of time. So Mars is not that inhospitable by the standards of space. Greenhouses, this is an established technology. You can use them all over. I used to live in Alaska. We had a greenhouse there. It works in extreme environments. Mars has lots of carbon dioxide. Of course, that's very good for plants. So that is the resource that you have to keep the greenhouses running. We now have food recycling technology as well as water recycling technology. So starvation and thirst should not be issues, especially if you keep the number of colonists at a reasonable level relative to the amount of development you have. And because Mars has air, you can fly planes and helicopters around, which makes it easier to move around and transport people and things around Mars. One of the main debates regarding the colonization of Mars is whether we should terraform it, or I should say the debate is about how we terraform it. Now, while there are obvious advantages to having a Mars which is made to feel, look, and be like the Earth, that is not necessary. Terraforming Mars would take a long time and cost a lot of money. And it's completely unnecessary. So, the lower gravity on Mars compensates for many of the problems that you have there, like the unbreathable air. And what I mean by that is that because you have low gravity, it's easier to land on Mars, easier to take off from Mars. If you send older people out, it's easier for them to walk, so if they would have lost mobility on Earth when they get to Mars, there's only half the gravity, they might be able to retain a lot of their mobility. And water and other resources are already available without resorting to terraformation. So there's no need to terraform. That is a red herring, the idea that we actually have to terraform before we can colonize. If anything, we should colonize and then terraform as we go. There's no need to terraform ahead of time. One thing that's very easily ignored in the hubbub about Mars is that the planet used to have life in the distant past and indeed may still have some kind of life right now. Concern over contaminating that life is stupid, considering that the goal of our colonization would be to promote our own lives and the development of life more generally. Now, the planet definitely had life in the past. That has been revealed several times by scientists, but then hushed up quickly by NASA and others. And if it did have life, and we know it did, we don't know exactly how abundant it would have been at this point, or at least scientists aren't telling us because they like to keep information secret because secrets mean power. So, if it did have a lot of life, that means that you'll have lots of oil, coal, and natural gas. And since there hasn't been a civilization on Mars to extract it, that means that you will have a lot of fossil fuels. These have obvious benefits. Since Mars will be colonized by Earthlings, it only makes sense that Mars's economy should develop in tandem with the Earth. A natural market system should be allowed to emerge, which will allow Mars and the Earth to create a balance of power and a balance of trade. Now, for Mars, the issue would be that it would need more than it can put out in its early years. That's why it's essential to begin exporting fossil fuels as soon as possible if it proves to be practical. Chances are a lot of that will be needed domestically to generate power. But one thing that Mars has plenty of is iron and salt, and those things could be exported by the ton. Now, due to the fact that Mars is currently oceanless, that means that the whole surface is open for mining, and that's also one reason why I am opposed to terraformation in the early stages, because Mars will need to have access to those mines in order to keep up its trade balance at a proper level. There's also the possibility that we could find either new elements or elements that are rare here on Earth, like uranium or plutonium, or diamond, or anything of that nature that are easily accessible on Mars and that could be sent back to Earth. The other thing is that you could possibly make money by having sports leagues for retired athletes from Earth. So for instance, what if you have a retired NBA where you could have Penny Hardaway and Michael Jordan playing again like it's the 90s, and they could actually be more athletic than ever because you're only going to have half the gravity. So that's just an idea. Obviously that wouldn't be a major economic factor, but you got to think creatively and figure out ways for your planet to make money. The other thing is that because Mars is a foreign planet, it would be a great place for scientists to come visit, and they could pay fees to do the research. And it also serves as a gateway to the outer planets. So for missions going out there to Europa or wherever, whatever other planets are out there, Mars would be a great place to stop. So it could be basically a stationing place. It's probably become as apparent to you as it is to me that for something to be run well, it has to be run by a private entity and not by the government. So the main three countries which could run it all have fatal flaws. The US is too liberal and too regulated to survive in space. Also, the United States is broke, and it's not worth deficit spending on that level to establish a colony which may or may not succeed. Russia, we should not allow to put up a colony. We should even go to war with them if they try, because Russia is evil and incompetent. They would not do a very good job. Everybody who would go under the Russians would die, and the colony would just be a massive money drain, just like the Soviet Union was. China, they have the money and resources and definitely the population to spare, but for the most part, China's very bad at science. Mostly they specialize in hacking and stealing other people's scientific discoveries. Local government for a colony is definitely best. Look at the Americas and how well the colonies prospered when the crown left them alone. All the settlers would need to be volunteers, and it would be easier to get volunteers if they knew that they weren't going to be subject to tyranny from 30 million miles away. There needs to be a clear chain of command. There's no time to waste with debates and pointless squabbles over who was actually in charge. There's also no room for waste and fraud because you're on a planet like Mars and not a place that's designed for humans like the Earth. So you have to have a private company which looks at the bottom line rather than regulations and red tape. So what is a private government and what would it look like? Well, if we want to make it as effective and efficient as possible, we should model it after a corporation. You at the top, you'd have a CEO who's in charge of the daily operations, and his power would be balanced out by a board of stockholders. So people who really invested and made this project possible in the first place. They would effectively be the governing class, at least in the initial stages. Now, to ensure that these people have a stake in it that goes beyond the financial, all board members and managers being a little bit below the board members, would have to live on Mars. They couldn't govern from Earth. That would not be acceptable. That would defeat the point of local government. The volunteer settlers with practical skills will be middle class, and by practical skills I mean everything from business management to engineering. And these guys would have the chance to rise to management or the board given sufficient time. And in addition, to make sure that common tasks are done that aren't very important, you can use prison labor and other dregs from Earth's overcrowded cities for mundane tasks. They could be sent here by their home governments to get rid of them, and this would be a way for them to have a second chance and for the colonists on Mars to be able to have enough labor to do the things they need to do. Finally, living on a different planet, especially since this will be our first time doing it, will be extremely stressful and will cause a lot of tension among the people on the mission. That's why these people absolutely need to share a common moral grounding, and that should be in the form of a shared religion, and it absolutely has to be Christianity. Ideally of the non-denominational Protestant variety, and that's because Christianity has a proven track record of improving the morality of the people who practice it. Ministers will be counted as managers, so that way moral concerns will definitely be on the board's mind when they meet. Christian morality will prevent strife and ensure obedience, which of course is necessary for survival in a harsh environment. Also, as a security force, you need to make sure you recruit well-vetted Christian soldiers who have both combat experience on Earth and have a well-grounded and disciplined faith in Jesus Christ. Now, to make sure that everything stays according to plan and that unnecessary strife is avoided, we need to strictly enforce monogamy and heterosexuality. Adultery tends to lead to violence a lot of times by the person who's been cheated on, and homosexuality sometimes, and allowing homosexuals, they tend to be more prone to violence, and that's not really something we can afford. It's not a luxury you can afford on a place like Mars. They would need to be deported to Earth immediately if they're found out. Anyhow, that is how I think that we could successfully run a government on Mars and set up a successful colony that would help spread human life across the solar system. This has been a Remarkable Republican, bringing you the truth with truth-flavored bias, signing out.